I am Lemuel Gulliver, and I'm going to tell you the story of A Voyage to Lilliput. I, Lemuel Gulliver, was born in Nottinghamshire, England. I attended Emmanuel College in Cambridge when I was 14 years old. 3 years later, finding the cost of college too great, I was apprenticed to a doctor and studied to become a surgeon. Since I always longed to travel, I also studied navigation, for I hoped to use my skill as a surgeon on board some ship. Well, when my studies were finished, I got a post aboard the good ship Antelope, and on May 4th, 1699, set sail for the East Indies. Everything went well until we encountered a violent storm, and our ship was driven far to the south. The storm lasted so long that 12 of our crew died, and the rest were soon in a very weak condition. On the 5th of November, the wind blew us directly upon a rock, and the ship split in two. 6 of the crew and I managed to get into a boat. We rowed until we were able to row no longer. Then we allowed the waves to carry us where they would, and in half an hour the boat was upset. My companions disappeared, while I swam as fortune directed me. When I could struggle no longer, I found myself in a shallow place where I could touch bottom. Ahead of me was land, and I began walking for it. Though I came nearer, I could see neither houses nor people. This didn't disturb me, for I was so weak and tired, I simply lay down to sleep. At daylight I awakened. I tried to rise, but could not stir. I found my arms and legs were firmly fastened to the ground, while my hair was tied down in the same manner. As I lay there, I heard a peculiar noise, but tied down as I was, I couldn't move my head to see where it came from. Shortly after, I felt something alive moving on my left leg and advancing toward my chin. At last I discovered what it was. It was a human creature, not more than 6 inches tall. He had a bow and arrow in his hands and a quiver on his back. Then I felt at least 40 more of the same kind following the first. I was so surprised and roared so loudly that they all ran back in fright. However, they soon returned, and one of them cried out in a shrill voice, "I command thee, go!" About this time, I was able to break the strings that fastened my left arm to the ground. But before I could seize them, the creatures ran off a second time, and with the shrill cry of, "Goldo, Hornet!" I felt over 100 arrows sink into my left hand. These arrows stung and burned like needles. Then they shot another flight, and these fell on my face. I began to groan in pain, and they let loose another volley of arrows. By this time, I realized it was wisest to lie still into night, when I hoped under cover of darkness to loosen the bonds which held me. But when the people saw I was quiet, they stopped shooting me. However, I could tell by the sound that their numbers had increased. Then, for about an hour, I heard a curious hammering on my right. When it ceased, about 50 of the little people cut the strings that fastened my head, and I could see they had built a stage, upon which 4 of the little people were standing. One of them, who looked more important than the others, began to make a long speech of which I understood not a single word. As well as I could, I made signs to them that I would do them no harm, and then, feeling faint with hunger, I pointed to my mouth many times to show them I wanted something to eat. Well, they must have understood me, because several ladders were placed against my sides, and about 100 little people climbed up and carried to my mouth all kinds of food and drink. The food was delicious, but the portions were very small. The leg of mutton was no bigger than a lark swing, while the loaves of bread were the size of bullets. The people were amazed at the huge amount I could eat. As the small people walked back and forth over my body, I was sorely tempted to seize 40 or 50 of them and throw them to the ground, and then to make a dash for liberty. But the pain I had already suffered from their arrows, and the promise I had made not to harm them, made me think better of it, and so I lay there quietly. Soon another small man, who appeared to be an officer of very high rank, marched on to my chin and held a paper before my eyes. The officer then made a long speech, often pointing towards something a long way off, and, as I afterwards learned, told me that the emperor had decreed that I was to be taken as a prisoner to a city which is the capital of their country. After this, the little people drew out the arrows that still stuck in my hands and face, rubbed the wounds with a pleasant-smelling ointment, which, in a few moments, so soothed my pain that I fell fast asleep.